Hello, this is our podcast, China in Our World, with Thomas W. Pauken, your host, and which is me, and I am author of U.S. versus China, From Trade War to Reciprocal Deal. And I'm also an Asia Pacific Affairs commentator based here in Beijing, China.
Hi, I'm Edward Say. I'm based in Hong Kong. I'm a strategy and management consultant.
And I'm Suvam Paul. I have been a Beijing-based media professional, and I'm also a published author. I've been living in Beijing for the last 4 years. And over the last few months, I have been staying put in Beijing, and I have seen how COVID-19 got unveiled in the country, and how the Chinese government so efficiently and remarkably controlled and contained the entire epidemic.
Yes, and that's very important to note, because most of our show focuses not on the problems, but on the solutions. That's why when Edwards, you approached me and we said, let's talk about solutions. That is an amazing idea, because the problem I see right now in the media is a lot of complaining. Oh, how terrible China is, how terrible the US is, or how terrible the Europe is. Well, that's okay. You know, people are going to complain, but what you need to focus on is solutions. So Edwards, we witnessed a lot of interesting dynamics this past week. The America has continued on with its blame China game. And Edwards, what would you like to say about this specific topic, the blame China?
Yeah, I think we've seen quite a number of news coming from the US over the last week about how the US is viewing China. Of course, much of that is, at least in my view, is rhetoric, because we are fighting a common enemy, which is a pandemic, and pandemic doesn't really know national borders. It's a problem that we face as a humanity. We don't face it as Americans or Chinese or Indians. It's a collective issue. So, you know, trying to point fingers at someone else is probably not the priority right now, or not the right thing to do. It's much better to focus on how we can work together to collaborate and to, you know, put together our energy in fighting, you know, this major crisis.
Now, what I find interesting, and I've actually been asked by some people in Beijing, and I think it's a good question. How can China tell the world it really wants to help? Because the problem right now is very few people believe China wants to help. I mean, what do you believe is the right approach for China to explain itself, to say that they really want to help?
Well, I think ultimately it has to do with actions. You know, of course, there's a lot of misunderstanding, perhaps a lot of make-up stories about what China's intention really is. But if you look at the actions of what China has been doing, how China has been trying to help many other countries who has been also been affected by the pandemic, you know, with both the medical supplies, but importantly, sharing of experiences by the medical workers, doctors, you know, on the China experience so far. I think many countries actually find it to be very helpful to really learn from what China has done, perhaps not so right, but also what China has done right in the process. So the countries can learn from the experience that happened before, you know, their own country happened, you know, to have the pandemic.
Sure. So we can also discuss other countries, Suvam. India, and we actually had a good discussion about this, how the Indians are very good about medicines and the scientists. And earlier on our podcast, we did together what we discovered for this Easter Sunday. On Easter Sunday, what we talked about was that the Indians have been very successful at manufacturing pharmaceuticals, but perhaps they need better assistance on the distribution and exports. So, Suvam, what would you like to say about the pharmaceutical sector in India?
Yes, as we discussed earlier, Indian pharmaceutical sector is quite, I'd say, robust. robust in nature, and our innovations and research and development R&D is quite strong. But the problem, as you mentioned, is distribution. And I guess China is the biggest market at this moment for for any drug makers, and especially after COVID-19, like the global demand is quite high. And I think Indian pharmaceutical companies and Chinese distributors, they can join hands, and they have to iron out the basic issues. Like there are a lot of permission issues and a lot of restrictions between the two countries in the trade. So they have to iron out those flaws, and then they can come together, and they can actually deal with the situation stronger than ever before. So this epidemic, this pandemic, actually paves the way for a great opportunity for both India and China together. And they have to fight the war together, as Edward already mentioned. Like this virus doesn't care about your country, your religion, your location, your region, your continent, nothing. This virus actually, has kind of united us, I would say, united the mankind, and all of us should join hands to fight it together. So that way, Indian pharmaceutical sector can join hands with their Chinese counterparts, and together they can fight and win this battle, I believe.
And what's also interesting about Edward Zha is he's a consultant to major corporations, and he's actually introduced me to a number of your Indian friends. And what's with, say, the Indian companies during the coronavirus, during these times right now?
I couldn't quite hear the back end of what you said, Tom. Perhaps the connection is not that great.
How has your relationship been with Indian? Okay, yeah. I'll re-ask the question. So I know that you're working closely also with many Indian companies. And so my question would be, he's addressing the pharmaceuticals and their problems with distribution. Have you had some good talks with Indian companies recently during this crisis of the coronavirus?
Yeah, I did have quite a bit of discussions with the Indian startups and also the venture capital funds. But I think what Suvam talked about makes a lot of sense. The Indian pharmaceutical industry has been outstanding industry for a long time. It's very powerful, very productive, and have done really well. I think there's a lot that the Indians and the Chinese can work together and to create new solutions to fight against this pandemic. For example, we talked about this also in the last time when I talked to the Indian startups, because many of the startups were involved in technology areas. They are also picking up technology as an enabler for their own innovations. The Chinese, as you know, Tom, very well, the Chinese has been at the forefront of commercially applying technology on all sorts of applications, including in healthcare. I personally believe that there's a lot that Indians and the Chinese can work together also on the technology side on how to leverage technology as a new way to fight against the pandemic, because technology can really help. It can really help early detection, early prevention, and also the more effective remedies and treatment. So on top of that, if you have good drugs like what the Indian pharmaceutical company has been doing, that combination could be very effective.
Something I've noticed, and I think it's going to be a major trend coming out of the coronavirus, is what is known as PPP, public-private partnerships. You're going to have a lot of private companies working more closely with government to work on major and big projects. So a lot of times when it comes to the major scientific developments, you're going to see, and I've seen China very effective at this, in Shenzhen and Beijing and Shanghai, is developing these hubs of science and high-tech ventures. Now, what I'd like to ask Suvam is India taking the same approach or how are they promoting their high-tech industry?
Yes, I mean, of course, it's not as phenomenal as China,
Okay.
the way China has done so far, creating this spatial economic zones. And,
Sure.
the Chinese startup ecosystem is quite vibrant and it's really like buzzing, I would say. Whereas India has, I mean, I would say a late bloomer, late comer as well. As Edward mentioned, like there are a lot of, he's working with a lot of startups. He has a better understanding of the fact that the Indian startups are off late. They have started gaining steam, and they are kind of moving ahead. I would say they are still like they're yet to bloom fully, but they need, I think, the Chinese collaboration, expertise sometimes, and the distribution power to magnify their growth. And India has, I mean, the Corona pandemic has taught us a few lessons. And as we have seen, the Chinese entrepreneurs, the Chinese startups, they played a huge role, especially the IT sector. They created a lot of new inventions during that, like robotics, AI. They did really well. I mean, they helped China to contain the virus. Similarly, if you see India at this moment, that there are a lot of R&D projects are going on. A lot of a lot of labs are producing cost-effective kits, test kits. Yeah, like some of the thermal scanners are produced for a price of say 100 RMB. It's so cheap because in India, a product is always valued with its price. If it's if it's cheaper, you get a better market in India. That's the mindset
That
of
was
the
China. That was China long
once,
ago, right?
long ago. Yeah, exactly. So I think during this epidemic in India, you can see a lot of startups are producing a lot of interesting. They're coming out with a lot of innovations, and a lot of drones are also being created by some of the startups, like China did. So I think it's a collaboration is must. And IT and pharmaceutical, these are the two sectors where like both the countries come together, and vaccine research is another sector where I believe, like, because some of the Indian companies, I mean, I remember of one company that's a Serum Institute of India, SII, Pune-based company. They are the world's largest vaccine manufacturers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, part dosage wise. So that company, they have tied up with an American company recently, but they are also looking for funds and venture capitalists from China. And somebody like Edward, and I think you people are in the business. You should help. You should pitch in.
And he is. That's why we're doing our podcast, because it's about encouraging collaboration, encouraging some more unity.
Absolutely, Tom, Suvam. I'm very fortunate over the years to get to know quite a number of Indians. And I think in general, the people that I met are very, very smart, very capable, and also very creative. Perhaps, in the past, they have been a bit constrained by perhaps the system in India. But, with the help of the Chinese investors, as well as the Chinese tech companies, I think the Indians can really unleash their individual capabilities and to really be even more impactful. China and India are the largest population countries in the world, right? So 1.4 plus 1.2, that's a lot of people. And if we can come together and collaborate, even in the face of a crisis like the pandemic, actually we can turn this into the opportunity for us to really create new disruptions and new innovations for the benefit of humanity.
Yeah. What I find interesting as well is that, as we all know, India and China have been longtime political rivals, economic rivals. There have been a lot of cultural differences. But it looks like, for example, Modi is following the Chinese President Xi model of lockdowns and quarantines. And I think that's a good thing, actually.
Yeah, that has proved correct. I think if you really see, I mean, India, as Edward mentioned, India is a country of 1.3 billion people, and China is a country of 1.4 billion people. So 1.3 billion people, if you really see, like if you compare India's current number of infections and number of disease at this moment, it's absolutely negligible. Like India's total number of death toll is not yet 1,000. And it's been 3 months. And India shares its border with China. And I was telling Tom one interesting fact that, from China, India hasn't got any infections. If you really see the first 3 infections in India, those students, they came from Wuhan. So those were the only 3 infections, I mean, cases from China. The rest of the cases came from the West. I mean, all the whatever 4,000, right now 8,000 cases of infection. So those came from the West. Those came from the Middle East. Those came from the Europe. So that way, I think both India and China played coordinated and synergized with each other to contain the virus at that time during the early breakout. But now I think of late, I mean, towards the end of March, it started emerging from the Middle East and the Europe and the West. There, I think there is a serious problem. But if you really see the number of people live in India and the kind of, population density in a lot of city and a lot of urban areas, it's phenomenal that we have got only 8,000 cases of infection. I think, with President Xi, as you said, like Modi is a big follower of his model. Even in demonetization, if you really see, like he wanted to replicate the Chinese digital economy boom. So India has, there were a lot of objections within the country. People were not opening to this idea. But eventually, I think India has become a big market for online shoppers. Like same with China, the online shopping is really getting bigger. The logistics and service industry, like home delivery and all, these sectors are booming at this moment, and that's thanks to China. And I think Modi has a good rapport with President Xi. And even though India being a democratic country, there are different opposition forces who view China differently. Maybe with some of the elements within Modi's party. But overall, if you see the top leadership, Modi is absolutely, he wants friendship with China. And that's been shown time and again. And the 2 summits, the Wuhan and the Mamallapuram summit, those actually can be a good example, which has been said by the 2 leaders and the rest of the Indian companies, Indian business, from the cultural side also, they can follow this model, I believe.
But I'd also like to, sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to introduce like how you mentioned the issue of democracy. So I can, Edward and I can have this discussion is about what we've noticed is that in China, they've been very successful at containing the coronavirus because you have a very organized and effective top-down approach. Basically, she says, we're going to focus on public health as a bigger priority than the economy, so be it, and the entire country has become unified. And I think when people ask me, what's going on in America? Why is it that they cannot get their act together? They have the best healthcare, they have the best resources, they have the best technology, they're the largest economy, they got the largest government. How did it go wrong? I think the problem is I'm not criticizing democracy. I'm American and I love democracy. But sometimes in a crisis, you have to think in a unified and support solidarity. So, Edward, what is some advice you would like to give to our American viewers and how to become more unified in fighting the coronavirus?
Well, I think humanity is always sort of trading off between personal freedom or personal rights versus a collective behavior, right? Or what you call organization. That's history. Over history, we've seen the pendulum swinging from one side to another. It's always the case. Humanity is like freedom. We all like freedom. We want to be able to do our own stuff, right?
Sure.
At the same time, with 7 billion people on this little planet, if you don't have any organization, then it will be chaotic, right? And I think we are now seeing that a total anarchy wouldn't work. But at the same time, you can't also be 100% controlled. You need to decide what is the optimal position for each of the country. And each country actually have chosen its own path, right? America has chosen its path, India has chosen its own path, and China, without knowing it actually, have chosen its own path because the reform and opening since 40 years ago was an experiment. Deng Xiaoping didn't really know what to do. He was doing experiments, but he inherited a planned economy from Mao Zedong, and that is his legacy. But he also knew that that legacy didn't quite work. We need to sort of experiment, and after 40 years, this is what we get. A China model, which I call a three-layer model, with the central government at the top, the entrepreneurs at the bottom, but also the local governments in the middle who orchestrate and become glued between the central government and the people. That model is working for China. And this pandemic actually creates a purpose, a common purpose for people within, let's say for China, we need to fight this pandemic quick. And therefore, within this model, China was able to marshal the resources against the common purpose. I think the Americans also understand there's a common purpose, but because the organization was not there, it's not available, and at least at the very, at least for some part of the government, is not that organized, and therefore you can't marshal the resources in a very efficient manner to fight against the pandemic. Therefore, you're still seeing some chaos in America at this moment. But I was reflecting on this, Tom, the other day, as you know, America did a great job right after the Pearl Harbor attack, right, by the Japanese at the beginning of the World War II, right? In fact, that started the Pacific War, right? And but America was able to put together its resources quickly and really marshal its resources to fight Japan over the vast territory of the Pacific Ocean and eventually won the war. That was incredible, right? I mean, in a way, we're now fighting a war as well, even though it's a pandemic, not a physical war. But nonetheless, it's a similar issue. Why can't America replicate the same behavior or same performance as they did, during the World War II, right? Tom, what's your view as
no, and I'm glad you addressed that, because I actually was thinking about this last night, and I was talking about this with Suvam. It's that fact that it's an invisible army. It's something invisible. You can't see it. So it's sort of like, I think some of the strengths about America is we're full of confidence. We believe in ourselves. We're always optimistic. No matter how bad something gets, we always think we're going to get that Hollywood great ending. But the problem is with the virus, you don't see it. How can you kill me? How can you destroy me? I don't see you. So it's very hard for them to comprehend this. It doesn't really impact them until their family members start dying, their friends start dying. And then suddenly it's like, oh, wow, this invisible enemy is powerful. And I think, unfortunately, it's going to take what's happening right now, where you have the most virus deaths happening in the USA, and its family members being affected, their friends being affected by it, for them to realize that this is an enemy they have to defeat. So what I've noticed is, if you carefully pay attention to President Trump's messaging, and I do it all the time because I know he's not as direct as many people think he is. He likes to give clues and hints at what he might do in the future. And he had given a hint about a day or two ago that this idea of starting the economy running to normal in May might be too early. He said, maybe it's too soon. Maybe we need to wait a little bit longer. I believe this is a very good sign. I think Trump is starting to realize that this invisible enemy is becoming more powerful. And then when this happens, what I think, and I would like to see Americans do better, is the Democrats and Republicans need to say, is what it is. And I had this, we talked earlier of Suvam. What exactly did India do? Because I do see a sense of unity right now in India, which actually surprises me.
Yeah, that's interesting because India is a multi-polar democracy. You have different parties, political parties with different ideologies, and you have some of the political parties who have a big say in the national politics, but they're actually they are formed with regional politics, regional issues. So there are a lot of regional political parties who are making a lot of impact in the national politics. But in this case, I would say it's something to do with Modi and his leadership. He has kind of his opposition mocked at him when he started doing those, utensil banging exercise or lighting candle, those kind of, some tasks he had given to the country for 9 minutes, for 5 minutes. So some people mocked at him, but if you really see the overall picture, a lot of Indians, they came united. That showcase, the entire thing showcased that India came together. I mean, I know many anti-Modi people who don't like Modi. They also lit the candle. They also, banged the utensils. So that's why I think it's a sense of unity which Modi was able to create in the people's mind. That's been working. But as you said, like democracy is also sometimes we take it for granted, and anarchy also sometimes it comes with it. Anarchy or sometimes disruptions. So indiscipline also sometimes come with it. So we have to bear with that. But India has, I guess, like though these factors are very much there, indiscipline in some areas, disruptions also are there. But I think as a whole, India as a country, 1.3 billion people, they have come together, and hopefully in the coming days we can see a better result. Yeah.
And Edward is based in Hong Kong. But you know what? I've been reading the news about Hong Kong recently. It's not bad news. I mean, I'm not hearing about the protest. I'm not hearing about the really bad stories. I'm actually hearing that although the numbers are rising of coronavirus cases, it's not, extreme. But I would say that it looks to be like even the people of Hong Kong are becoming more unified as a city. What is your impression, Edward?
Yeah, I think as we were discussing, right, the pandemic is an unfortunate event for humanity, but it also provides a cause for unity, a common purpose for all of us to try to fight together. And we're seeing this in China, Suvam talk about what's going on in India, in a way similarly in Hong Kong as well. The priority right now is to really fight against the pandemic. Right now in Hong Kong, most of the new cases are from people who came back from outside of Hong Kong. A lot of students, as you know, Tom, they were studying in places like the UK, boarding schools, but UK also have its problem, right? So they came back from the UK to Hong Kong, and some of them also carried the virus with them. And some people went outside of Hong Kong to other places like Peru, to do tourism. They also got the virus. So anyway, so right now, we still have some infected cases, but great majority of those new cases are actually from outside, not from within Hong Kong. So it's getting better, but we cannot relax, and we still need to keep a very close tab on things, and we're still keeping social distancing and all the stuff that That's good practice, right, as we have on by now.
Sure. Sure, and also I think something to point out on, and sort of for each of us to leave off for today's podcast to address is just this aspect of the coronavirus. Yes, it killed many people, and many people were sick by it. But when you sort of look at it, it woke up the world. It made people realize what is most important.
Absolutely.
So what I see, if there's anything positive, of course, we're not supposed to say it's positive that there was a pandemic, but at least it's a learning lesson for all of us. And that I believe that, my experience here in China is I have sensed a greater unity, a greater spirit of solidarity, that we survived this together. And I think that's an amazing story to tell. So Suvam, what about you? What's the positive, some of the positives that you've learned from coronavirus, these experiences recently?
Oh, it's phenomenal because I mean, to be honest, like this is probably the only event. As a newsman, I can tell that this is probably the only event in this century. I forgot about it, which has actually united the economists, the historians, the scientists, the mathematicians, the statisticians, even the sports persons. So this has got an impact on every sphere of our life, every topic under the sun, every researcher under the sun. Everybody has got affected or impacted by this pandemic. So I think it's in a way, if you see in a positive side of it, that's actually like it has unified the mankind. That's what I believe.
Sure. And Edward, and how would you like to leave off on maybe some of the positive that may have happened from this experience so far?
I agree with both of what you said. This pandemic is a very unfortunate development for humanity, but at the same time, it also provide a point of unity for all of us. I also would like to say that it also helped humanity to recalibrate what's important for us. Whereas before the pandemic, a lot of focus about ourselves is about, for example, how much money do you make, who's the richest people in the world, who are the rich, who's the richest guy, and so on, who's the most famous movie star, all that kind of stuff, right? But today, you don't hear that much, those kind of news that much, right?
Yeah,
People are very focused on life and death. How can we minimize the number of deaths because of pandemic? And I think this is a good, in a way, right, a good reflection of what's important for us as humanity. We live in a very small planet, and it's pretty crowded actually. And many of the issues that we face are actually global issues. Not only the pandemic issues, but also issues such as climate change, pollution, technology, like AI ethics, those kind of things. And it requires us to lift upon the day-to-day common issues such as who's richer, who's not as rich, and who's famous. It allows us to live higher and to think about a higher order issues. And I think in this case, the pandemic actually is now teaching us that don't worry about or don't focus yourself on this, technical stuff, but focus on the higher order stuff, what's important for all of us. And forget about, who you are. In other words, are you American? Are you a Chinese? Are you an Indian? Are you an African? It really doesn't matter. It is a common issue. And regardless of the color of your skin, right? Regardless of whether you're a man or woman, you're tall or short, it's the same issue, right? Let's work together and try to sort of fight this together. And I think this is, in a way, is a wake-up call for humanity. And I hope, and I think this is good. Like Suvam said, this is the only story now that we are.
It's the only story.
And this is, in a way, from that standpoint, is good.
Sure. And this is how, for this Easter Sunday, April 12th, was a lovely spring day here in Beijing. And I was with my insightful guest, Suvam Paul and Edward Zhou out in Hong Kong. It was great talking to you guys. As I said, let's stay positive. Let's think about the solutions. And we'll see everyone again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.